I just think now, Phoebe, you and I can say as Jewish women that we should be allowed to sleep around. And if our husbands don't let us, they're basically Adolf Hitler.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Maltz-Bovey. You're listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. The Jewish Angle, a play on how whenever you're in Jewish media, you always have to find a Jewish angle on everything. There's a story behind how every guest on The Jewish Angle comes to be the person I ask on for a particular topic. Here, it's a bit different. I've been planning to email today's guest for the purpose of discussing Woody Allen's debut novel, What's with Baum, because she'd done a great review of it for which she interviewed the man himself. Then something happened. A story broke in London, where she lives, London, England, I should specify, not London, Ontario. And she had a really sharp response to it on X. And I thought, okay, this is now urgent. So I am delighted to have back on Hadley Freeman, author and columnist at the Times of London. Hadley, nice to see you again.
So nice to see you, Phoebe. Thank you for having me on for all the important subjects. I'm very honored.
And we may even throw in a little bonus, not directly Jewish content that just happens to be preoccupying us. So if you want a little discussion of Lindy West memoir drama, yeah, just that's the little treat at the end, perhaps. So, and I promise we will also discuss Woody Allen and his novel. But first, I have to tell you how much I appreciated your to-the-point response to Jonathan Liew's really despicable Guardian opinion article endorsing vandalism against Jewish or perceived as Jewish businesses in the diaspora. He explicitly includes window smashing in the original version of the article. And he calls these, quote, small acts of petty symbolism, end quote, against the Israeli government.
Right.
So your post, if I may read it, was, so let me get this straight. 1, petty activism against a Palestinian-owned cafe is bad. Agreed. 2, but violent activism against a cafe that people associate wrongly with Israel is justified and understandable. Update your rule book accordingly. I enjoyed that. So, Gail's, we're going to do like a little background lay of the land before talking about what this article was and why it has gotten people so upset, myself included, and also like amused in a sort of perverse way. Like, I don't know. It's ridiculous, but it's also horrible. Gail's. What's Gail's? Because I don't know what's a Gail's.
So Gail's is a chain of coffee shops in England.
How dare they? How dare they?
How outrageously dare they? And it's very good, Gail's. And I mean, my American equivalent would be Pan Quotidien, a little bit posher than Au Bon Pain, but just, a nice coffee shop that you find in so many cities or now around Britain. The reason it has become this lightning rod for anti-Israel activism is because it was originally set up over 20 years ago by an Israeli-British woman, the aforementioned Gail, but she sold it a long time ago. She has no involvement with it whatsoever. And its parent company is now one of those funding companies that I don't understand, called Bain Capital. And Bain Capital, among its many investments, also invests in Israeli cyberware. So this is the excuse for targeting Gail's. So people have started sort of defacing Gail's around London in particular, writing, go away Zionists and Zionist genocide, et cetera, et cetera. And they justify that by saying, well, Bain Capital invests in Israeli cyberware. None of this makes sense. First of all, they never go after Bain Capital headquarters, which are in London, and they never go after any of the other restaurants or
That was going to be my next question. Like, I don't know which capital sponsors like McDonald's or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, or anything that's not like an extremely small independent business. That's,
Totally. And Bain is behind Dunkin', is behind Burger King, Domino's. Like it has investments in a lot of food places. And somehow those are never defaced. And it's obviously because Gail's has a kind of Jewish image to it. You can buy challah bread there. I do buy my hamantash in there for Purim. But it's not like this kosher place. It's a nice coffee chain that happens to have some Jewish food in it.
So that is there is an analogy. I was just going to say there is an analogy that exists in New York. There's also kind of one in Toronto. So there's Bread's Bakery in New York, which has been itself,
Right.
JTA has been on that beat as well,
Right.
for reasons that we can get into later. But that, I think, is very much, from what I have looked at online, the same concept where it's not kosher. It has a lot of just kind of basic Western/French pastry type things, but also has like, they'll have like soufganio, you know what I mean? Like they'll have some little
Right.
nods to Jewish this and that. The clientele, well, because it's New York, a lot will be Jewish, but like it's not a Jewish establishment in the same way as something that's kosher or that's really explicitly mainly having that. You could, like, it seems like if you get like ham sandwiches and hamantaschen, right? Like it's that
Totally.
type of
Totally.
thing. But then in
Totally.
Toronto, I mean, I'm thinking like we have a couple things that would be like this. Cafe Landwehr definitely is a chain that's, I mean, it's more restaurant than bakery, but it's kind of the same idea where it has also gotten political agitas, whatever. And then Amadeus is another that's like more upscale pastries, but has some Jewish stuff. And I feel like Jonathan would find some things to be mad about, I'm sure. And they have a security guard in the front, I've noticed, even though they're just like,
my
this is
God.
not normal for bakeries.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that is the thing with Gales. And I've been wanting to write about why people get so angry with Gales for a while, but Jonathan Liew at The Guardian beat me to it. And his take was that in Archway, which is in North London, an area of North London, there is a Palestinian independent little cafe near the tube stop. And now Gales has opened nearby, which he sees as a heavy-handed
You're quoting
act of
him. This is
aggression.
not you
And
describing it. He literally says in the piece. Yes.
yes, and compares it to the war with Israel taking over Gaza. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Like, please Google it. And he quickly mentions that yes, there has been some vandalism against Gales, but also the Palestinians who run this little cafe have been told to take down their flags, and there have been some stickers, and that is outrageous. Whereas it's totally understandable, given what Israel is doing, that that smashing a window would be someone's response to Gales. And there was this huge fury about this because it was basically Crystal Knox, but make it woke, as far as I could see. And it stayed up for 3 days on the Guardian website. And then they issued a clarification yesterday, I think, or maybe 2 days ago, which wasn't an apology. They just said they would slightly change two of the sentences in order to avoid misunderstanding. So it wasn't that the piece was explicitly telling people to target Jewish bakeries and smash their windows. It's just that we weren't sophisticated enough to understand the point of the piece.
Yeah, I do think the context of that it isn't just one place is very important, because if you imagine that it was just this one place, you might think, well, maybe there is more to this Bain's thing, Bain of our existence, whatever. But it's like, this is just like, I did a piece for the CJN like months and months ago, if not like a year ago at this point, just cataloging all the places that had been targeted as vaguely having to do with Jews or Israel, right, not just in Canada, everywhere. And it is really remarkable. And it is at the level of like, this is a bagel shop, I'm getting a vibe, I'm going to avenge, and it just, what I have found very frustrating about all of this is that it really is this complete twist from the way discrimination was discussed about 5 minutes ago when it came to other groups. Like, you weren't supposed to collectively blame people for things that you associated their group with. You weren't, and you weren't supposed to sort of, if you were the person discriminated against, say, well, I guess you have your good reasons. Like, that just wasn't how it was supposed to go. And now it just seems to have changed. But there was something really, really bonkers in this piece that I just wanted to talk about because it was just a little funny. Okay, this is a quote from it. "These two North London cafes from two entirely separate worlds with what we have to assume are two almost entirely separate clienteles." End quote. It just so happened that within like the 24 hours of my reading that sentence, I had literally been in a sort of like one of these fancier croissant things and gotten a chocolate croissant there, and had a very casual, down-to-earth bowl of hummus at actually it's an Israeli and Palestinian place, EA Toronto. And it just seemed very funny. So, Hadley, with your London expertise, are these two entirely separate groups of people who would sometimes have an upscale latte and sometimes have falafel or whatever?
No, and I think it's very telling that that's what he thinks. Like that a person would choose where they buy their coffee according to their political beliefs. Whereas I think, both these cafes are right next to Archway Tube Station. I know exactly where they are. It's just going to be commuters rushing in to buy a cappuccino on the way to work, rushing in to buy a green tea. This idea that we should segregate our clientele or that clientele are naturally segregated is just bizarre. And, I don't want to go on about The Guardian too much. What was really amazing to me was, so that piece came out on the Sunday. There was a big, or Saturday maybe, there was a big furore over the weekend. And on Monday, they published a review of Howard Jacobson's new novel, Howl. Howard Jacobson, I'm sure all CJN readers know, but he's a really excellent, very Jewish, very British novelist. He's, I think, in his 70s. He's written probably about 15 novels. If you like Philip Roth, you're going to like Howard Jacobson. He's very funny, very irascible, and, really very Jewish. And his new novel is about his character's frustration at seeing how anti-Semitism is basically condoned by the progressive left. So it's very much about what's happening. And The Guardian ran this review, and I'm not going to quote this exactly, but I'm not far off, where he said, the reviewer said, the character feels that October the 7th opened the door to a wave of anti-Semitism, a view many readers will find morally repulsive. And I just thought, will they? Because that seems to me like a fairly basic statement of fact that since October the 7th, there has been a lot of anti-Semitism in this country. We've had attempted murders on synagogues in Manchester. There was a survey last week saying 1 in 5 British students wouldn't want to share a house with a Jew. There has been a lot of anti-Semitism, including with Gail's. The idea that such a very moderate statement, something that most people are seeing with their eyes, would be found morally repulsive, and certainly apparently by this Guardian critic, was extraordinary to me. And the fact that the paper ran that review while all this kickback was coming from Jonathan's piece, it just really blew my mind. It really made me feel like the paper was having some nervous breakdown.
I wanted to, though, just one more question about the Gail stuff before we move on to Woody and, even more excitingly, Lindy. What is it with the food establishments thing? Because this is what I was trying to make sense of when I wrote about this a while ago. I feel like there's something that seems to really rile people specifically about that, not just like Jewish food places, but like a Jewish food place that isn't overtly Jewish and that's a little bit upscale, that could be called a gentrifier. It seems like that seems to be the thing. Like people are existing while Jewish, while assimilated, while not destitute. I mean, I don't want to, like, this is the thing that has driven me nuts about like privileged discourse since time immemorial, but like, you do not actually have to be rich to sometimes buy a fancy latte, because like, it's not housing. You know what I mean? But anyway.
Yeah. There's something, I'm gonna go there, a little bit Nazi about the way people are so freaked out about cafes that that are actually a little bit Jewish, but people might not realize that, and therefore we have to let them know by writing Zionist shill all over the front. I think there is a weird thing in that the nice areas of life that Jews have always been associated with and celebrated for, such as food and movies and comedy.
Beautiful segue.
Well, I wasn't even thinking, I mean, yes, we'll go to Woody, but there's something about it that makes them really angry. And I've really been thinking about that in relation to the Oscars this week, because it was the Oscars on Sunday. And for the second year in a row, the explicitly Jewish movies that had been nominated were basically almost totally shut out. Like, I thought it was so striking last year that The Brutalist and A Real Pain, which were both clearly the best movies of the year and were very Jewish, got shut out for Anora, which was a movie about how hot prostitution is. Great. And this year, the very explicitly Jewish movie, Marty Supreme, which I thought was so good. And I know people find Chalamet annoying, but that's to the side. That basically got shut out too. And what we also had at the ceremony was obviously a lot of pro-Palestinian activism, and also Kumail Nanjiani making some weird joke about Schindler's List, about in a new era, it'll be shortened to Schindler's Tweet, with Steven Spielberg sitting right in front of him. And in recent years, there have also been scandals about the Oscars Museum not acknowledging the Jewish founders of Hollywood. and then finally acknowledging them, but describing them all as predators. So there's this weird discomfort in the American movie business about the fact that Jews have been so associated with it and in fact built it. I think there's something similar with the food in that Jewish food has really assimilated into the culture. And now we'll get to Woody. Jewish comedy has so defined, certainly American comedy, since the 60s. And there's been I think the rage that Woody has inspired for the past 20 years has been a real backlash against that, this kind of irritation at how Jews have really, been so great at comedy.
I think you're onto something. I definitely think that Woody Allen's specific mix of being very Jewish and being a very certain sort of defiantly provincial, well-off New York Jew, I should say. I grew up for a lot of my childhood literally living across the street from Woody Allen. Not in the same circumstances, not in Woody Allen's stratosphere, but I would see him on the street. And so I understood where a lot of the settings were of this book, much of which takes place within a few blocks of there. But I wanted to talk about, there's something where I was thinking that, like, on the one hand, when people are like, Woody Allen just doesn't do it for me, or there's something about Woody Allen that I don't like, I'm like, okay, so you hate Jews, I get it. But at the same time, I am a woman as well as a Jew. And I was thinking, like, I feel like I had this while reading and writing about What's with Bam. I had this kind of what felt like a very profound thought. I don't know if it was that profound, that basically feminism has been on the rise, not always succeeding, but like there's been a lot of interest in feminism, at least. Anti-Semitism has also been on the rise, and that these together kind of explain both Woody Allen's falling star in a way and my own ambivalence towards his work, because I think he's brilliant. I also find a lot of we're separating out personal life for now. Some of it's kind of unpleasant towards women.
Yeah, but then others are fantastic to women. Like this is the thing with Woody, is certainly the earlier you go, the better it is to women in a funny way. Diane Keaton was such a
the better
great
it is just in quality,
I mean,
also, I think. I mean, that's,
yeah, of course. But something like Annie Hall, like, it's like a great movie about a woman, celebrating a woman. I love like Purple Rose of Cairo, which is just such a beautiful love letter, really, to Mia Farrow in many ways. Broadway Danny Rose, hilarious. Hannah and Her Sisters, amazing. He was a great director of women for a long time. It was seen by actresses, if you got cast by Woody Allen, you would get an Oscar, because he wrote great parts for women. He didn't make them take their clothes off in movies, and he seemed to get on with them. As he has always said, in his 50 years of working, no actress has complained about him, which is true. But that's a separate situation from what we're getting into now. And as you know, Phoebe, I grew up very near you, and I grew up very near where Woody lives now. So like you, I know that milieu, and I have a lot of sentimentality for Woody movies. But I think since Woody had the initial backlash against him in the mid-90s when he got together with Sun Yi, and particularly since 2014 when his biological son Ronan and his adopted daughter Dylan have sort of brought this whole molestation allegation back into the spotlight, I think there's been something in him that has become very deliberately stubborn and almost played to the worst assumption. He's determined to play to the worst assumptions of him in a way of almost like provoking, being like, kind of, screw you. I mean, he would never say that. Like, I interviewed him the first time in 2020 when he had that movie, A Rainy Day in New York, whatever it was called, with Elle Fanning came out, and Timothée Chalamet. And I said to him, given that the Me Too movement has really, like, kicked you, and people now think you're a pedophile or, child molester, was there any part of you that thought, maybe I shouldn't have a line in the movie making a joke about a girl giving a boy a blowjob at a bar mitzvah? And he said, no, not at all. I just think about it if it's funny. And I was like, but it's not funny. And it's sort of like, that would not be in, any of his great movies. That wouldn't even be a Midnight in Paris, which I love too. It's not funny. It's just creepy.
Yeah.
And the stuff has become increasingly creepy, I think.
So I'll just jump to a question that I want to be sure I've asked you before I forget, which is, so you interviewed Woody Allen at his home in New York for your September 2025 piece for The Times about his novel and about him. I just have a journalistic question, which is, so you say you first interviewed him in 2020. I know you interview famous people, but how did you get to interview this famous person?
Well, I had written a lot of pieces about Woody and the suspicion around him in regards to the molestation charge. And I'd gone through the original court documents and just laid out the facts that nothing was ever found. You know, Mia Farrow accused him of molesting their then 7-year-old daughter, Dylan, in 1992, while they were in the midst of separating because he had been caught having an affair with Sun Yi, who is Mia Farrow's adopted daughter. And so I, went back and I interviewed the people who'd been involved in that case and just wrote a piece saying, there's never been any evidence for this. He wasn't even charged. And so it's ridiculous for people like Maureen Dowd to talk about him in the same breath as Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, et cetera, Roman Polanski, et cetera, all of them Jewish. And I think there's he has said, I think there's a slightly anti-Semitic thing about the way people talk about me. And I think that is true. I think they see, him as part of this gallery of rogue Jews. And of course, there is the Manhattan problem, his movie Manhattan, which I've always thought was creepy. I don't know what everybody else was smoking. Suddenly now everyone's like, oh, actually, the movie Manhattan's creepy. It's like, yeah, no kidding. In which he plays a 42-year-old who's having a romance with 17-year-old Mariel Hemingway. And she turns out to be the idealized woman in the movie. I mean, it is a weird movie. But you think about, okay, it was made in the 70s. No one who saw it in the 70s seemed to think it was creepy. They all thought it was the greatest movie of all time. So why are we castigating Woody for it and not everyone else who was applauding it, but separately? So I'd written a bunch of pieces, not exactly defending Woody, but saying there's no evidence to accuse him of being a pedophile. And it's weird how he's being canceled now in 2015, 2016, 2017, when this case was totally dismissed 25 years ago. And even Mia Farrow said in the hearings that she didn't think that he'd actually done anything. So the whole thing was weird. And so I think because they saw me as a friendly person, they allowed me to interview him. And so I went to New York to interview him for his new novel, What's with Baum. And when I landed on that day, the New York Times published these photos of a letter from Woody Allen on the wall of Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse, and also a note from him that had been in one of those birthday books from, I think, 2004 or 6 or something like that, saying how he and Sunny had been to dinner at Jeffrey Epstein's house many times and how weird it was, but happy birthday, Jeffrey, basically. And so when I went to the house, I asked him a lot about it because I find it incredible that a man who was living with this suspicion over his head was hanging out with Epstein even after Epstein went to prison in 2009, I think it was, for having sex with an underage girl in Florida. And they were still going for dinner at his house all the time up till it looks like 2016, I think, 2017. And I was trying to understand his thinking on that.
So there is this incredible moment in your piece where you basically describe giving Woody Allen an opportunity to say he regrets that friendship, and he refuses to take it. And he just is like, nope, not going to do that. And what I was thinking about was your piece came out in September. February, there's been a whole new bunch of all these extra files. The New York Times has been kind of continuously latest Woody Allen, like there's a Woody Allen and Epstein beat practically, where it's like Epstein got Woody Allen's daughter into college, Epstein more whatever, Epstein, this is the one that is like somehow emblazoned on my own mind, that as a birthday present, Epstein gave Woody Allen $9,858 worth of Swiss men's underwear as a present. And men's underwear, not like some sort of sexy stuff for women, but like just Woody Allen's got under his corduroys is that. And I was wondering, in light of all of this, whether this changes things in any way, or whether it's more of the same. It's more of this, Woody Allen seems like a person with terrible, terrible judgment about whom one could have a bad vibe, but that is not the same as like, what do you think?
Yeah, so what I think, Woody's argument is that it's not like he was having orgies with girls at Jeffrey Epstein's house. He was always there with Sun Yi, and that is in the files. Like he is talking like he's there all the time with Sun Yi. But I think it shows a weird amorality to be socializing with this guy who'd been in prison. I did ask him about this, and he said, well, I asked him about when he was in prison in Florida, and he said, oh, he'd been extorted and it wasn't fair. And, the Florida police were crooked, et cetera, et cetera. And Woody was like, okay. And to be fair to Woody, a lot of other people thought similarly, definitely. Like they just saw Jeffrey Epstein as this rich guy who could get them into places. But my feeling about Woody and what I was trying to get to him was, you don't need that money, whatever money he had. And you don't need Jeffrey Epstein to get you into places. Like, Jeffrey Epstein was then using Woody as bait to get people over to the house. Yeah. Like, what were you getting from this? And he said, well, he lived just next door. And
yes, I swear, that had been my theory, is that he just, maybe this is just my own knowledge of that very specific part of the world, but the fact that somebody would choose doesn't have to leave the East 70s within a few blocks, or East 60s and 70s, whatever. I'll buy that. That probably was the actual reason, which isn't very sexy, and which does make me think, like, I've written about this as well, but like, I do think there is an anti-Semitic element to the just thirst for stories about any Jew who interacted with Epstein, even if it wasn't in a kind of like sordid capacity.
Yes.
Whereas I think some, and I say this with the knowledge that, like, I think each case is different. I think like Larry Summers asking Woody Allen for, not Woody Allen, Jeffrey Epstein. Oh my goodness. Woody Allen would have been wise, relatively. Asking Jeffrey Epstein for advice on how to seduce a younger woman. Fine. Okay. That's not good.
Woody says that every time he'd go to Jeffrey's house, Jeffrey, as he called him, Jeffrey's house, there were always interesting people there. People like, the magician David Copperfield, or professors from the University of Arizona. But my feeling again is, these people would go to your house, Woody. Like, you could have these people over, but Jeffrey Epstein just made it super easy for him. And I think there are a lot of rich people, a lot of successful people who've been closeted and taken care of all their lives. And they like having people who facilitate things for them. The main thing is proximity, definitely. But Woody said, when I asked him, like, why on earth did you ever hang out with this guy? And he said, well, Peggy Siegel, who's this publicist in New York, organized this dinner because Prince Andrew was staying with Epstein at the time, and Sun Yi wanted to meet a British royal. And we arrived there, and there are all these famous people there. And Woody, to his credit, was like, I don't want to name names, but everybody else who'd been at this dinner has named names, and they've all named Woody. So we all know, like, it was George Stephanopoulos and Katie Couric and Chelsea Handler and blah, blah, blah. And Woody just thought, okay, well, here's this guy who knows all these other famous people, therefore he's fine. And that just shows how the celebrity world is such a Ponzi scheme, where they're all looking to see if other people are there who they recognize, and that makes them feel good about being there. And Epstein, I think, was good at sucking up and, knew how far he could push it with Woody. He wasn't going to invite him to weird orgies. Mm-hmm. But he just wanted to hang out and talk about, Goddard with him or something. And that's what happened.
I was wondering about, I think Woody Allen, like, what you see in Baum, I think, is the role of taboo, because this clearly interests him. I think this is more, like, I think it falls somewhere between Woody Allen was actually secretly looking for orgies and Woody Allen just wanted to hang around with interesting people, maybe, because I'm going at now fiction, although, like, autofiction perhaps would be a better word. So there's so much in the book that's sort of squicky, but like just going up to the line. So there's like Baum ditches his first wife for her identical twin. Connie, his third wife, is infatuated in more than a sort of usual boy mom sense with her adult son, Thane, who definitely does not seem like any real people at all. And then there's Baum being convinced that his own brother has slept with his wife. And then there's Baum trying to steal his stepson's girlfriend, who's a grown-up, a younger woman, but a grown-up. Right. It seems like he's very, very interested in taboo. And that is like a big theme in his work.
No, I think that's true. And that is, something that does make my heart sink. I mean, he says, because I asked him, Hen and Her Sisters, like, that's such an interesting movie in retrospect, because Sun Yi is in it as a kid. And it's about, and in that movie, you get Mia Farrow, Diane Wiest, and Barbara Hershey as the three sisters. And Woody Allen was married to the Mia Farrow character and ends up married to her sister, played by Diane Wiest. And in this movie, we have Mia Farrow, his partner, and Mia Farrow's daughter, who Woody ends up with in real life. Like there's a lot of weird parallels. And he said, I don't think of it like that. I just think of what's new, what will surprise the audience, what will make a laugh. But there is something a little, doesn't think like most people, I would say, is one thing. And I think there isn't that sense of propriety, maybe necessarily, or morality. I would put it even better, morality. He would see as morality as the enemy of comedy. And I think there was a part of him that was interested in the idea of this nefarious guy on his doorstep, someone who'd been in prison. Like you don't get many of those in the East 70s,
Right.
perhaps. And I also think there was a part of him that thought, well, I've been treated badly. Therefore, other people who've been treated badly were also done wrong because it wasn't fair what happened to me. And you and I have both seen that happen to a lot of journalists, on ostensibly our side, like women journalists who've been canceled for whatever reason about gender stuff or anti-Semitism stuff. And sometimes they end up going a little bit too far into the heterodox universe.
I am aware of this phenomenon. But I also thought that with Jeffrey Epstein, I think there was this kind of meta news cycle that was reported as all these creepy men hanging out together, when I think it was actually something a little savvier on the part of Jeffrey Epstein trying to kind of clear his own name by saying, look, all these falsely accused men, all these unfairly canceled men, I stand among them. And it's like, okay, Woody Allen appears to have been falsely accused of molestation. That doesn't mean that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't accurately accused of not entirely dissimilar stuff. So you know what I mean? Like, anyway, but I wanted to talk just one more thing about the book. So mortality and fear of death are obviously big Woody Allen themes, certainly big Woody Allen as an elderly man themes, of course. But I read this book as being at least as much about a fear of irrelevance, which is a little different, I think, than fear of death, because it happens while one is still alive. Like this fear of having your work being passed over for that of younger people or younger men in this, and also just having tastes and a value system that are just out of step with the times you live in. And something that I found really interesting is that Baum is 51. This book takes place in the present. There are a lot of sort of hints that it does, right? There's social media. There's
the restaurants,
lots of little details put it in the present. But this is also like a man who's Woody Allen's age. Clearly, this was a man who was mentioned as being part of the City College Cafeteria Intellectuals, which is like a group from the 30s. Like, what's going, like, and I'm trying to figure out, like, is this weird stuff about time in this book, about just sort of trying to live in this New York that it's not a consistent nostalgia. It's not nostalgia for a particular time. It's just like not now. It's like that which is not now.
Yes, I think that's true. And he's always said he's a bit out of time. And it's so interesting going to his house and you look at his bookcases and they're full of books about like 1920s New Yorker writers, several books about Roman Polanski, not worrying about that cancellation, and he has like 1,000 like vinyl records.
And then he has this Instagram post where he says, this year, I'm only reading novels by women of color. Just kidding.
Did he say that?
No, I'm joking. What? I'm saying what would be the least Woody Allen. I am just being silly. I don't think he has any Instagram posts.
No, I don't think he has Instagram posts.
Sorry, a TikTok, I should have said. Yes. Then it would have been more obvious I was joking. Yeah.
I think, when I met him, he's really sad, to be honest. The thing for Woody Allen now, he's 90. Most of his friends have died. And when I went there, I think 2 of them had just died that year. Like his one friend left is Dick Cavett. Who knew Dick Cavett was still alive even? And I think there is a wistfulness in that book about the friends going, which would have been more interesting to write about rather than, a feeling of career irrelevancy. Although he may feel that too. I think, he denies, it's ridiculous. He denies that the characters of Connie, the wife in the book, and Thane, her son, are based on Mia Farrow and Ronan. I still think of him.
He has to legally say that, though, right? I mean, that's the thing in the beginning of every novel. There's this text. This legalese about these are any resemblance is coincidental.
Well, I guess so. But what's weird is when you look back at his memoir, the way he talks about one of Mia Farrow and Andre Previn's sons, whose name I can't now remember, like one of the boys who was with her already when Woody got together with her, is exactly the way he describes Thane in the book. This like boy who's clingy on his mother, who his mother is slightly too close to, and they share a bed, etc., etc. And then, according to Woody, that is what happened with Ronan. When Ronan was born, then Mia was just all over him and shared a bed with him till he was 10 or something like that. So there's obviously echoes, and the fact that Ronan has become this celebrated journalist at the New Yorker, which used to be Woody's place, you can't help but see the parallels.
Yes. So what really clicked for me, and this is where I felt, there are 2 times I felt extremely unintelligent in my whole life. No, but just to do with this specific book. One is, I knew it was going to be revealed that the character, who's definitely not Ronan Farrow, was a plagiarist, because that I just saw coming, because obviously he's like talking about what a phony he is, phony. Sure enough, he's a phony. It took me really long to realize that this was like a kind of Ronan Farrow stand-in. But then when I just I looked back at what I'd written about this 2020 memoir and remembered then that Ronan Farrow got Woody Allen's memoir canceled, effectively got it unpublished from the big publishing house it had been at.
Yeah.
And then it suddenly made sense why this is a novel that feels much more motivated by revenge against,
totally.
against a younger man who's relevant. The relevant man,
totally.
as versus anything about like there's side plots about like the beautiful blonde shiksa who looks like she's from a farm and she didn't even need any Botox, blah, blah, blah. That's whatever. But like that doesn't seem to be what's like motivating the plot.
Yeah. I mean, and it's sad. You think that, Ronan is actually his son.
Yeah. Well,
and this is... Or is he? I mean, Mia has.
We all have Google image search and can. So we have to talk about. Speaking of relevance, the relevance of the 2010s feminist blog voice that was Lindy West. We are going to have to conclude on that note because we have to. We feel compelled. Sometimes Lindy West is not Jewish. Her spouse, her husband, her spouse, it is inconsistent depending where you're reading, uses they, them pronouns currently. You can apparently have sister wives even if you use they, them pronouns. It is a wide world. They are not Jewish. There's another person in this household, Roya, not Jewish. It's not a Jewish story. We are nevertheless interested in it. So is this another relevance story or is it something else? So Lindy West has a new memoir out. This writer who is very prominent in the 2010s blogosphere also broke out of that world, had a best-selling memoir called Shrill that was turned into a TV show that's streaming on Netflix. Now I'm watching some of it. She has a new book, Adult Braces, a memoir about how she, did you read the memoir?
I have read the memoir. And it's about how she found this husband. And even though she, as she describes herself, is overweight, not seen as conventionally hot, her husband marries her, which is so extraordinary because in today's culture, he should try to, he should be trying to marry up or something. And she goes on and on about this.
This is Shrill, right?
Yeah, in Shrill. In Shrill, she goes on about it. And now in the new one, we find out that, guess what? He did then marry up in the sense that he then brought a younger, conventionally attractive, thin, tiny, petite, whatever woman into their house. And now they're a throuple. And I think the way I'm going to make this Jewish is Lindy was really at the sharp end of bringing identity politics into feminism. Suddenly she was very scolding about how people talked and you had to use like the right terminology, very much there about trans women are women, very much about body positivity. The whole of Shrill is basically a body positive memoir. And the Jews never came out so well from identity politics. Lindy never said anything anti-Semitic. Let me clear that up. But it's not like we ever had our real identity politics moment. We were never seen as needing the boost that identity politics gives to minorities. But I think we can learn something from Lindy's new memoir because the way Aham sells polyamory to her is that he is mixed race,
yes.
I think. I can't actually remember. Yes, he is mixed race. And he says to her he can't do monogamy because that would be like slavery. because then Lindy as a white woman would own him. And Lindy...
Sorry, I've heard this now many times, and I read it and it's still making me laugh. Sorry, go on.
It's incredible. And Lindy, who apparently had a lobotomy in 2014, actually buys this.
A metaphorical lobotomy. We are clear. This is
a metaphorical. I should stress. Yeah, she just seems to have stopped thinking at some point. And she goes, yes, as a white woman, perhaps I hadn't thought about it before like that. But you're right. I'm owning you by asking you not to fuck around. I just think now, Phoebe, you and I can say as Jewish women that we should be allowed to sleep around. And if our husbands don't let us, they're basically Adolf Hitler. I just feel we can learn from Aham, because Aham has made identity politics really work for him, and we Jews did not. And now we need to learn these lessons from Aham.
Hadley Freeman, you are welcome back anytime on The Jewish Angle.
So go forth and make sure your husband isn't Himmler or Goebbels or someone, and go bring a boyfriend into your house.
Why stop at one? This has been amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Thank you for listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. This has been Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, opinion editor of the CJN and a contributing editor of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's print magazine. The show is produced and edited by Michael Freeman. Our music is by Frank Freeman. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Jewish Angle wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.